Obrigado, Claudinho. Bom, boa noite a todos. De novo, eu me chamo João Vitor. Nós estamos iniciando a última atividade aqui do dia, que é a mesa Resistência Jurídica e os Afrodescendentes nas Américas. Eu estou aqui, né, com o Fred Rooney, que é um advogado que tem sua experiência, né, demonstra muito compromisso com a justiça social. Então, ele trabalhou ao longo dos últimos anos instalando incubadoras jurídicas para jovens advogados. E a partir, né, dessa atividade, ele teve muito reconhecimento com essa iniciativa. Ele passou, então, a receber algum apoio da Fundação Fulbright e, atualmente, ele também trabalha para o Programa das Nações Unidas para o Desenvolvimento, o PNUD, com essas iniciativas.
Alô, som, ei, som. Vamos tentar?
Tá bom. Tudo certo? Certo? Bom, voltando aqui após problemas técnicos, essa é a última mesa da atividade de hoje. Se chama, né, Resistência Jurídica e os Afrodescendentes nas Américas. Do meu lado esquerdo, estou novamente aqui com o Fred Rooney. Ele tem essa experiência, né, em instalar incubadoras jurídicas em vários países. E hoje, né, teve grande reconhecimento no passado, foi um especialista da Fundação Fulbright e agora trabalha pelo PNUD. E do meu lado direito, a professora Judy Anderson, que é uma antropóloga afro-latino-americana e professora associada ao Departamento de Estudos Étnicos e Raciais da Universidade da Cidade de Nova York, CUNY. Ela possui doutorado em antropologia, né, e pós-graduação em estudos latino-americanos pela Universidade da Flórida, e ela criou e liderou programas de estudos no exterior, tanto para a Argentina quanto o Brasil. Desde 2005, ela pesquisa a organização política negra na Argentina, um país, né, conhecido para a gente aqui como a famosa nação europeia ou branca na América Latina. A professora Judy Anderson também é cofundadora e consultora principal da organização Afrodescendente para Assistência Jurídica e Formação, ou AFRO, a primeira organização negra da assistência jurídica da Argentina. A gente vai começar primeiro com o Fred, depois a gente escuta a professora Judy Anderson, e aí, no final, a gente vai ter um espaço aqui para poder algumas perguntas e respostas e ouvir os comentários de vocês. Então, Fred, muito obrigado. É um prazer ter você aqui novamente e fique à vontade com a palavra.
Good evening, everyone. It's very, very great to be back in Niterói. It's great to be back at the university. I was here at the end of November, the beginning of December, and then I saw Pedro and a number of folks in the room when I was in Washington recently, and so I can't tell you how much joy it brings me to be back. I do want to recognize a few people. Pedro, wherever you are, thank you for all you do for so many people. It's quite obvious that you touch the lives of many people. And I just have to say a shout out to Gita and to Bruno, because they really helped me. Bruno saved my life today because he helped me with my presentation, and Gita's always been there. I do want to recognize Robert Solorzano and Violeta Vidal, who are here from Washington. They've been friends for many years, and so I just want to say thank you for coming. I'm going to start the presentation, so yeah, I want to start just by recognizing that I'm speaking in honor and in memory of my colleagues in Gaza. This is the first time I'm going to speak publicly about some of my experiences there. It's very difficult, but I'm going to do my best to get through it. And so I'm just saying that, you know, I was there up until 2 weeks before the war, working with young Gazans, working with, you know, people just like you who had dreams and aspirations. And unfortunately, we know what's happened since then. Next. And you can go next. Yeah, the name of this topic is Looking for Common Solutions. And I'm going to talk specifically about the US, Brazil, and France, because we have a colleague who's going to speak tomorrow, Daniel. And Daniel is from the Department of Justice in Paris. And Reynaldo Ortiz, will be here, he'll be here shortly. And I have been working with Pedro on issues that we have in common. You know, we have lots and lots and lots of problems with justice, and I think we're trying to look for some common solutions. Next. Okay, so if you look at, this is go back one more, just go back. Yeah, this is the World Justice Project in 2024. And the organization does an exhaustive review of justice all over the planet. And go back again, yeah. And as you can see, you know, if you look at where we stand, the United States stands as number 26 in the world, and Brazil is what, is it 80, and France is 22. When I think to myself as an American citizen, that for the richest country, economically wealthiest country in the planet, we're number 26 on the list of countries where access to justice is so limited. And I oftentimes talk about the fact that statistics can show that up to 75% of people in the US have no access to justice because they can't afford it. So what I think, Danielle will tell you, and Reynaldo and myself will tell you that in all of our countries, and Pedro, and I've listened to it every day since I've been here, Brazilians are in the same situation as we all are. As the richer get richer, the middle class seems to shrink, and the poorer get poorer. And when you're poor and you don't have the ability to protect your rights, to reclaim a right, what's democracy all about? In the U.S., we say liberty and justice for all. And I always say, well, to make it true, we should say liberty and justice for all who can pay. That would make it a lot more legitimate. And so none of us have the answers, but we're all looking for some solutions. And when I come here and I listen to the work that's going on in Karadaki, in this institution, I'm so encouraged to know that in Brazil, that young people like you care enough about your country and care enough about your people to be able to do something. So again, I haven't come here with solutions, but I will talk to you a little bit about a program I started in 2007. And so next, please. And that's just more of a list of where the world stands in terms of access to justice. You can see that the Scandinavian countries, they do a really good job in granting access to justice for their people. And back in the maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the United Kingdom was great, but the United Kingdom has gone downhill with justice, and it's gone downhill with health. And I just want to say something that's very important for me to say, that I believe that access to justice and access to health and medicine are not privileges, they should be human rights. And unfortunately, we're all failing in one way or another when it comes to both of those areas. Next. And I'm just going to do, because I have some videos I want to show, I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly. How many people here are either studying law or are lawyers? Okay, so we have a good number of people. Well, what I've found traveling all over the world, and what I found is, after I got out of law school, is that you don't learn how to practice law in law school. You learn the theory of law and the anthropology of law, you name it, everything. But the bottom line is you don't know how to practice law. And so, they put more emphasis on corporate needs. Most people, young people around the world, go into law and they go into medicine because they want to make a lot of money. Because if you know how to play the game, you can. But very few people, very few law students go into law because they really believe in the idea that access to justice should be for all. And so, young graduates don't know how to do much. And so, unless you have a godfather or an uncle or an aunt to get you a job in a firm, and you try to start your own law practice, has anybody opened up their own law practice? No. Okay. One person. We got. Well, that's probably indicates that in Brazil, you can create a law practice, and you can make money, which you have to do, but you can also help people at the same time. And that's what my story is about. Next. I went to City University of New York Law School, and I was there. I went back in 1998 because Open Society, OSI, gave 4 law schools in the U.S. money to try to create programs that would teach law graduates how to practice law. So many young people who went in to practice law but didn't have the skills once they got out spent 6 months trying to do something and then failed, and then they went into teaching. And so when we have young people who care about justice and go into law because they believe in justice and they leave, it's a tragedy. And so 4 law schools came together. Open Society gave money, and I know Open Society gave some money for this event. We started the first programs in the world to train lawyers. And we focused on lawyers who were committed to working in the most marginalized and underserved parts of New York City, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, Staten Island, Queens, where people just had no access to justice. And we gave them the skills that they needed in order to create sustainable practices. A couple of years after I started back there, I came up with an idea of how to really maximize the training. I knew we were doing it by making people come back to school, graduates, after they left. Can you imagine living in Rio and having to come back here to learn what you didn't learn when you were in school? They did. They were desperate, but we were looking for a way to bring them under one roof. And so I had an idea to create a pilot project for 9 lawyers. We were going to find a space for them, and each of those lawyers would be able to create their own individual law practice. They would learn how to develop their professional skills and their business skills. So I don't know if anyone's heard of an incubator. In 2007, I only knew it was for a baby who was born premature, and they put the baby in an incubator until the baby can survive on his or her own. What I learned is that it was a business model, but based on that same concept. You come into the incubator, unable to survive. You learn how to develop your skills and your professional skills and your business skills, and then you leave. Well, okay, so we started an incubator in New York in 2007. Again, pilot project, no idea that it was going to be anything than a nice opportunity for 9 lawyers. Next. So within a very short period of time, 2007, there was one, the first one in New York. Then there was another one, and then there was another one. And 2 years later, there were 5. These were all replica of what we started in New York. In 4 years, there were 20. In 6 years, there were 50. And the reason I say that is because law schools and bar associations began to realize that if we wanted to create competent lawyers who were deeply committed to social justice, we had to do something in order to train them. And we did. And I remember thinking, by the time there were 60 incubators, I'm thinking, wow, I never thought for a second, I didn't even know if it was going to succeed, but it did. So next. I'm going to show you a short video about, this is a video by 2011. No? Yeah, I think it's back. Okay. So by 2011 or 2012, there were lawyers all over the U.S. in an incubator. And let me just say one thing. Part of the reason that I'm here, and I talked to Juliana about it, I talked to Pedro about it, is if we could create incubators all over the U.S., and eventually what you'll see is all over the world, Brazil would be the best place in the world to do it. And I say that because I see the commitment of all of you, and I understand that you are as committed to justice as I was when I got out of law school. And so that's kind of my hope and my dream. Anyway, they did a video. They asked people from all over the U.S. to send a short video to explain what was the value of being in an incubator for each of those individuals. And what they captured is a short video. Some of these they're going to be short, so bear with me. I've never done this before either. I've never shown videos in my presentations. But to give you a real sense, these are lawyers who were in incubators.
How do I look?
I'm an incubator lawyer.
I am an incubator lawyer.
I'm an incubator lawyer.
I am an incubator lawyer.
I started off with the public defender's office.
I had about 10 years of work experience prior to going back to law school.
I come from the big law firm background.
I worked for a big firm.
When you're opening your own practice, everybody kind of operates at a different pace. There are people that dive in and take anything and figure they'll learn as they go, and then there are other people that try to specialize or move a little slower and a little more choosy about what they take.
The incubator is helping me start my own practice by teaching me what I want to do and what I don't want to do.
I'm a solo family law attorney.
I am running a solo immigration law practice.
My practice mostly focuses on small businesses.
I'm a DUI attorney.
I currently practice family law in Coral Gables, Florida.
I am currently practicing in the areas of construction law and contract law and some business law.
Specifically, I'm looking at the immigration issues as they come into play in the criminal system.
I'm starting a medical legal partnership with the at-risk community and healthcare centers in the surrounding areas. We call it health justice.
A practitioner who focuses on LGBT representation.
I currently practice disability law, mainly focusing on children.
Starting a nonprofit to work with other lawyers and advocates to help people with disabilities and many social issues.
Election law is also kind of a unique niche area of law. We file recounts, we file recall petitions. We make sure that voting is fair and that everyone has access to the vote.
We focus on helping people who fall in the justice gap between where traditional lawyers can help people through traditional means have already been existing for a long time, and where legal aid organizations help people. So like low to moderate income people who don't qualify for legal aid, who need help.
Without the incubator, there's no way I could have pursued my dream of being a solo attorney and addressing the needs of those in the community.
We do a lot of work with people throughout the community in San Diego, doing a lot of pro bono, low bono work, helping people in disadvantaged communities.
The best resource that I think I've got from the incubator, my incubator, is the pro bono work that it set me up with.
I wanted to be in the incubator because I wanted to help people and have the opportunity to work with the community.
Because I wanted to help low-income clients.
Because I believe in helping my clients achieve results, no matter the cost.
My practice is different because of the way I bill. So a couple ways of doing that are flat fees and limited scope representation, where I can sort of hone in on what your big issue is, be able to address it without breaking the bank.
For me, I wanted to provide affordable help to real people. That means choosing to be able to work with clients that share my same settlement-minded approach to family disputes, as well as being able to charge flat fees that are based on results instead of hourly rates that are based on efforts.
I wanted to be in an incubator because it's always been my dream to work for myself and run my own practice.
I like running a business. I like doing the accounting. I like doing the marketing. I like meeting with clients, and I like also managing systems and putting systems into place. And so it allows me to take in all of my talents and put it into one place and have something that's truly my own.
There's the benefits of being your own boss, having the ability to, I don't have to wear a tie to work every day and not having a boss pounding on my desk and yelling at me.
I started the incubator program and my practice with a one-year business model and a one-year plan. I've been in practice with the incubator for 6 months, and I've reached all the goals that were in that one-year plan.
You're able to be very personal with the clients, able to ask them their problems, interview, investigate, and provide them a more comprehensive care.
Worst thing that's going to happen is I'm not going to get any clients. But I have lots of clients. I have 3 hearings this week. I have 2 hearings next week. I have a trial next week. So that hasn't been a problem.
Being in the incubator pilot program allows me the flexibility to raise my family.
I think this program offers such a great opportunity for people, in my position who are trying to
build a career like around motherhood.
The most valuable lesson I've learned is that knowing the law and practicing the law are two very different things.
The incubator provides resources like speakers on specific topics like accounting and marketing, things I didn't learn in law school but are necessary to opening a law practice.
We've talked about ethical issues, we've talked about malpractice insurance, we've talked about IOLTA accounts, we've talked about different types of trainings, we've talked about client management systems.
How much time do we have? The list goes on and on.
Developing clients, retaining clients, billing clients, collecting on those bills for the matters that you represent the clients on.
I wanted to be in the incubator because I knew that it was going to take a village to make my practice successful.
We have numerous mentors that help us through everything we never learned in law school.
There aren't a whole lot of people who necessarily want to groom their competition, but there are a number of lawyers who are doing that for us.
We're working with some wonderful practitioners who are at the other end of their career, retired or trying to transition out of their practice.
Daily life here is much like any other office, except so much better.
If I had started my own firm, working on my own in my own little office, sort of lose the opportunity to have a sense of camaraderie.
The camaraderie with the other people in the program.
A unique sense of camaraderie.
A feeling of camaraderie amongst all the other attorneys.
Another thing that was extremely important to me was to be able to collaborate with other young lawyers.
The opportunity to collaborate and work with other attorneys, not necessarily in my area of practice.
The collegiality is probably the thing that I like the most about the incubator.
Throughout the day, people are in and out, sharing stories, sharing experiences, and sharing knowledge.
Manage my own time, but also have a lot of people around me, so it's not an isolating experience.
My favorite thing about being in the incubator is bouncing ideas off my colleagues.
I have other colleagues to bounce ideas off of.
Having a sounding board and somebody there that you can constantly bounce ideas off of.
Bounce ideas off of other people.
Having the ability to bounce ideas off of each other.
The guy across the hall is also struggling with things and going through the exact same things, learning how to build a business, learning how to retain clients, learning how to, the best way to procedurally do something, and then when you get stumped, it's not really a stump.
I learn something from the other attorneys every day, and I like to think that I, in turn, am able to teach them something about what I've experienced.
Plus, we actually genuinely like each other, so it makes it fun to come to work.
What else?
Overall, my experience in the incubator so far has been wonderfully engaging, exciting, hard work, and worth it.
Okay, so by the time there were 50 or 60 programs, I realized I had done all that I needed to do in the U.S. and decided to take the model outside of the U.S. to see if it could be replicated. Next, please. In 2012, I was given a grant by Fulbright to take the model to the Dominican Republic. Now, it's a country where English is not spoken. It's a country that has significant poverty, a great disparity in income. But like Brazil, or like the folks you saw in that video, many young people who just really wanted to help their country deal with the unmet legal needs of individuals. I got a grant, and we focused on two areas. One is on gender violence. Many young women and girls are killed in the Dominican Republic. And the idea was to train lawyers on how to represent women. The other topic that we received funding was to deal with LGBTQ issues in a country that was extremely homophobic, where if you were known to have HIV, you could be fired from the job with no recourse. The program was a huge success. It was adapted to a Spanish-speaking country, and young people got tremendous education, left the incubator, and eventually went on to create their own practices. Can I just ask a question? How many people are interested in starting a law practice or being part of a law practice? Not many. All right. Well, a couple. Good. Next, please. In 2017, you know, the model I took to Pakistan. And there, of course, it's Urdu, which is the language, and many, many other languages in Pakistan. Next, please. And started the first in Pakistan. Go ahead.
پاکستان کی عوام کو سستا اور معیاری انصاف بھی دستیاب نہیں. انصاف کی فراہمی میں تاخیر اور وکیلوں کی بھاری فیسیں بھی عوام کا ایک بڑا مسئلہ ہے. اب عام آدمی لے گا سکھ کا سانس. ایکسیس ٹو جسٹس کے زیر اہتمام پاکستان کا پہلا ماڈل ایڈ سینٹر قائم ہو گیا. سینٹر کا افتتاح معروف امریکی وکیل فریڈ رونی نے کیا. فریڈ رونی کا کہنا تھا کہ اس لیگل ایڈ سینٹر کے ذریعے غریب اور مستحق لوگوں کو مفت قانونی معاونت فراہم کی جائے گی.
We as lawyers, no matter what country we're in, no matter what continent, have a responsibility to deal with the people in marginalized communities, vulnerable groups, and people who simply lack the economic resources to be able to defend themselves.
ایشیا کے پہلے لیگل انکویبیٹر اور ایکسیس ٹو جسٹس لا کمپنی کے ڈائریکٹر چودھری فیصل محمود اور انیلا فیصل کا کہنا تھا کہ پاکستان میں ایک ایسا بہت بڑا طبقہ ہے جو مالی مسائل کی وجہ سے انصاف سے محروم ہے.
Bear with me, just hold that for a second. The next one, it was a BBC presentation on the women of the incubator. Now, what you'll see as I speak, and I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. For me, women, the issue of women in the law is paramount. And so most of my work has been focusing on bringing more women into the legal system, wherever it is. And so in the Dominican Republic, in Pakistan, it was so important to be able to train lawyers, female lawyers, because in some of the Islamic countries, a woman could not go on her own to a male. And so it was imperative to have women who they could go to. Otherwise, they would have to go to with a brother or a father or a male family member. And if they had legal problems that were of a private nature, it was almost impossible. And oftentimes they wouldn't go. Can you go back to the one?
بی بی سی اردو کی پروگرام سیربین میں خوش آمدید. ہمارے لندن اسٹوڈیو سے میں ہوں عالیہ نازکی. ایک نئے تربیتی پروگرام کے تحت پاکستان میں گھریلو تشدد کا شکار ہونے والی خواتین کے لیے مفت قانونی مدد. ایسی خواتین کو انصاف کے حصول میں کن مشکلات کا سامنا ہے؟ اقوام متحدہ کی زیر اہتمام دنیا بھر میں خواتین پر گھریلو تشدد کے خاتمے کی مہم جاری ہے. دنیا کے بیشتر ملکوں کی طرح پاکستان میں بھی رپورٹ نہ ہونے کے باعث خواتین کے خلاف یہ جرم قانون کی آنکھوں سے اوجھل رہتا ہے. مگر بعض اندازوں کے مطابق پاکستان میں ہر دوسری شادی شدہ خاتون کسی نہ کسی مرحلے پر گھریلو تشدد کا شکار ہوتی ہے. ایسی خواتین کی قانونی مدد کے لیے اسلام آباد کی خاتون وکلاء کی تنظیم نے ایک پروگرام شروع کیا ہے جس کے تحت ظلم کا شکار خواتین کو مفت قانونی مدد دی جاتی ہے. دیکھیے موسیٰ یاوری کی رپورٹ.
زارا اپنی بہن کے لیے انصاف چاہتی ہے جو مبینہ طور پر سسرال کے ہاتھوں تشدد کے باعث ہلاک ہوئیں. خاندانی پس منظر کی وجہ سے عدالتوں کے چکر لگانا ان کے لیے آسان نہیں تھا. زارا ان کا فرضی نام ہے اور شناخت چھپانے کے لیے ان کی آواز تبدیل کی جا رہی ہے.
میرا تعلق ایسے گھرانے سے ہے جہاں آپ کو انصاف کے حصول کے لیے وکلاء سے رجوع کرنے کی اجازت نہیں دی جاتی. پورے خاندان میں صرف میں ہی تعلیم حاصل کر رہی ہوں، تو جب میں نے اپنی بہن کے ساتھ ناانصافی ہوتے دیکھی تو مجھے لگا کہ مجھے اسے انصاف دلانا چاہیے. ایک مرد کے مقابلے میں ایک عورت کے ساتھ زیادہ کھل کر اپنے مسائل شیئر کر سکتی ہوں.
انیلا ہدایت ایک ایسی غیر سرکاری تنظیم کا حصہ ہے جس کا مقصد عورتوں اور معاشرے کے ضرورت مند طبقوں سے تعلق رکھنے والے لوگوں کے لیے مفت یا پھر بہت ہی کم فیس پر قانونی مدد مہیا کرنا ہے.
میرا مقصد یہ ہے کہ خواتین، بچوں اور جو ڈس ایبل پرسن ہیں ان کو فری لیگل ایڈ پرووائڈ کرنا. خواتین کا گھر سے نکلنا پسند نہیں کیا جاتا. دوسرا ان کو جو ہے وہ جو کورٹ کی سروسز ہے، کورٹ تک اپروچ کرنا ان کے لیے ڈیفیکلٹ ہوتا ہے. تو مینی کلائنٹ جو میرے پاس خواتین ہیں وہ اسی لیے میرے پاس آتی ہے کہ آپ خاتون ہیں تو ہمارے مسائل کو آپ بہتر طریقے سے سمجھ سکیں گی.
اس پروگرام کے تحت ایک طرف تو مشکل کا شکار خواتین کو ہر طرح کی مدد فراہم کی جاتی ہے، جبکہ دوسری طرف نوجوان وکلاء کی تربیت کی جاتی ہے تاکہ وہ اپنے طور پر بھی ضرورت مند خواتین کی مدد کر سکیں.
ایک طریقہ کار ہے
इस दौरान उन्हें अपने पेशे में महारत भी हासिल होती है और बगैर फीस के मुकदमात लड़ने की तरगीब भी मिलती है।
और मैं अपनी फैमिली की फ़र्स्ट लॉयर हूँ, फीमेल लॉयर। जो पर्पस था इस प्रोग्राम का ये था कि जो फ्रेश लॉ ग्रेजुएट्स हैं जिनको कोर्स में कुछ सीखने को नहीं मिलता, एक तो उनकी लर्निंग हो, उनमें ग्रूमिंग हो और वो कॉन्फिडेंटली सोलो प्रैक्टिस कर सकें, डिफरेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के साथ अटैच्ड हो सकें।
तो अब क्या पहला स्टेप क्या होगा आपका मीडिएशन में?
सबसे पहले उनको कंफर्ट जोन में लेकर आएंगे।
ये नौजवान वकील अपनी पेशावराना ज़िंदगी का आगाज़ कर रही हैं। इस मौके पर उन्हें जुल्म का शिकार ख़वातीन की मदद के जज्बे और महारत से लेस करना पिसे हुए और कमज़ोर तबके की अदालतों तक रसाई की तरफ एक पहला कदम साबित हो सकेगा। मूसा यावरी, BBC न्यूज़, इस्लामाबाद।
So that's an example of taking the model that I showed you the picture, the video of all the folks in the U.S., young people, and then into the Dominican Republic, which was 3.5 hours from the U.S., the East Coast. Now it's in Pakistan. And so each time that the program was replicated outside of the U.S., I realized that if it could be replicated in Pakistan, it could be replicated anywhere. I'm going to go a little quicker now. In 2018, the United Nations Development Program asked me to see if we could jointly create a program in Gaza, the Gaza Strip in the West Bank of Palestine. For me, I would say that all the things that I've done in my life, and there have been many things, I've been all over the world, there was nothing that was more important to me than Gaza, because most of the people around the world have no idea what goes on there, because you're not allowed to go in and you're not allowed to come out. But because I was given credentials through the United Nations, I could go back and forth. And so beginning in about 2018, I started the beginning of what would become the first incubator in the Middle East. Next, please. Next, please. You don't have to show it. Hang on. Okay. After where was I? I was in Pakistan. Oh, Bulgaria. Okay. So in 2018, I got a grant through Fulbright to take the model to Bulgaria. When I found out that I would go to Bulgaria, I wasn't even sure where it was located. I mean, I think as Americans, we don't have much of a concept of the rest of the world. But I found out where it was. It's in Eastern Europe. And my idea was to create a program for young Roma lawyers. Now, I see people shaking their heads because you know what Roma is. The word in Portuguese, Roma is Cigano, yeah. For anyone who knows anything about the Roma people, they migrated from the subcontinent and about 500 years ago. They were enslaved in Europe. And to this day, the conditions of the Roma people from Eastern Europe all the way through Portugal and Spain are pretty alarming. In terms of education, it's the lowest. Health, employment, everything that you can imagine. And the communities that sometimes they live in are just beyond belief. Nonetheless, the idea was to create a program in Bulgaria. There's a video, I think it's a little bit long, and I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for Judy and for questions. So we'll skip that, but it was an extremely important program, and to this day, 5 or 6, 7 years later, it's still providing opportunities for young Roma. In communities of 10,000 people, for example, you may have 2 people who have graduated from high school. And so you can imagine the obstacles that you need to overcome in a place like Bulgaria if you're Roma, or Romania, or Albania, and all of the countries. It's hard to conceive of how backwards people have been kept. But it worked, and it's a huge success. Next, please. All right, so and then getting back to Palestine, in 2022, I started the undertaking to create a program it was supposed to be initially primarily, exclusively for Gazan women. But I think that the UNDP decided that it probably made sense to bring in some men, because that's a reality. And so it was 15 lawyers, 10 women, and 5 men. And when you're born and raised in Gaza, you struggle your entire life. Because you can't get out, there's nothing to do other than get educated. So the Palestinian people are extremely educated. And when you live in Gaza, you're living next to people who have nothing. And so the idea, as I mentioned before, was identifying young men and women who really cared enough about the people who were suffering in Gaza. And in 2022, we launched the first program in the Middle East. You can see that was the ribbon cutting. And the folks on the bottom were the initial group of young people from Gaza. Next, please. Next, please. That was the purpose. That was just the beginning of the program. It was the dream of everybody to finally come true, to have a program that would help them get educated so that they could help people on the Gaza Strip next. And then in September 2023, we celebrated the first successful cohort of lawyers who had gone through the incubator. Again, there was nothing in my life that comes close to seeing the joy that they felt, knowing that they were not only getting educated, but they were helping the most impoverished people in the Gaza Strip. The next video I've never shown before, but it's the women of the incubator talking about just how transformative their experience in the incubator was for a year. And if you think about what they're going to say, and then you go back to the first video of people from the US talking about it, it was a program that really transformed their lives. It transformed mine, and if it transformed mine, it transformed all of their lives. So this is women talking very sincerely and openly about just how impactful it was. So again, I've never shown this publicly, but I think they deserve to have their voices heard. Fortunately, they're all still alive. Next.
بدي أرتب الجملة بس عمري 27 سنة لا 26 سنة يعني لا أنا حدا يعني أنا هذا السؤال ما بنسألوش أكمله بتقطع بكمله إنه قلت زيني هيك بالسؤال فجأة كده أخذ نفس قبل الالتحاق بالمشروع كنت ببحث عن فرصة عمل كان الرفض أو كان إنه أنت ما معك خبرة لأنه أنا يعني واصلة لمرحلة بحياتي إنه فيش شيء تغذى بزبط.
جربت العمل في المحاكم وقبل الإنصاف كنت يعني بداية يعني ما بعد المزاولة ما قبل المزاولة أمضيت ما يقارب 2 و6 شهور في مكتب محاماة.
دربت عند 4 أشخاص حاولت أدور شغل عن طريق الإنترنت برضه ما زبطت معي. أنا لقيت الواقع معك تماما فكانت بالنسبة لي هذه أصعب فترة تمر في حياتي. قدمت كثير تطوع قدمت كثير تدريبات أخذت بس ما صح لي إنه أنا أقدم لفرص أو أخذ فرص يعني عمل. ما سيبت فرصة إلا وقدمت فيها ما يئست. كنت كثير محاطة يعني صراحة مش قادرة لا كنت حاسة بتهميش يعني هيك بس يعني أنا كثير إنسان طموحة وكثير بحب أشتغل على حالي بس كنت هذه الفترة حاسة حالي زي المهمشة محطوطة على الرف يعني مش معطية حقي نفسي كثير فكنت كثير كنت محطمة دايما أروح لأهلي أعيط اللي بدي أتجاوز هاي المرحلة فساعتها سبت التدريب سبت المحاماة بمحاكم حسيت إني مش مكاني.
كثير كنت متشجعة وكثير كنت بتمنى إنه اسمي يكون من ضمن المحامين اللي راح يكونوا لأنه الإعلان تبع إنصاف لما نزل
وجدت إنه هاي الفكرة مناسبة للي أنا بفكر فيها إن أنا راح أفتح مكتب
والحمد لله توفقنا فيها وصحتنا الفرصة إنه إحنا نشارك فيها
وكنت جدا متشجعة لأني كنت مطلعة كثير على مجال احتضان جدا فرحت انبسطت إنه أنا حقدم خطوة لقدام مش حضل في نفس المكان اللي أنا فيه.
فكرة إنه يدربني قاضي فكرة إنه يدربني شخص من مجلس النقابة كانت هذا شيء جديد.
بدينا لما ننزل على المحكمة ونمارس الشغل عمليا شلت الحاجز الخجل أو حاجز الخوف من إني أتعامل مع القضاء بالذات القضاء المستشارين الكبار القضاء الكبار.
في قوانين يعني مهمشة لا خلال الحاضنة تم تسليط الضوء عليها كالجرائم الإلكترونية كالأمان الرقمي وغيرها من التدريبات.
فعليا فترة التدريب كانت أكثر فترة ضغط في حياتي.
كنت أطلع من 8 الصبح أنزل مكتب أطلع محكمة
أرجع ممكن أيام مكتب حسب ما أخلص محكمة أجي كلية أرجع مكتب أخلص شغلي.
المعلومات اللي أخذتها كنت أنا فعليا بحاجة لإلها، أنا لسه باخدها وأنا لسه بدرسها.
روان تقدر تحكي 70% طورت مني. روان اللي كنتها قبل التدريب غير روان اللي كنتها بعد التدريب.
فمن خلال طبعا المحاضرات صار عندي مملكة قانونية أوسع. نفذت أنا كذا ورشة عمل مع لجان العمل الزراعي. طلبوا مني إنه أنا أحكي لفئة هشة فلاحين عن الإعلان العالمي لحقوق الفلاحات والفلاحين. كان عندهم استقبال وفهم للمادة اللي أنا بديها.
كمان جزئية كيف إدارة المكتب والإدارة المالية كان في تنوع كثير، هذا من جانب. من الجانب الثاني
أنا ما كنت بعرف أصلاً إن المحامي ممكن يكون متواجد عبر المنصات غير من خلال تدريبات إنصاف.
كان لي مدة على المنصات وما كنتش عارفة أتعامل معها، فمجرد يومين من التدريب أخذت على طول يومها جوب، فكان يعني كثير حلو إني كسرت الحاجز أخيراً.
إجاني الشخص العميل وتواصل معي مع إنه كنت أنا صفر تقييم وصفر مشاريع.
حصلت على جبين ضمن كتابة تقارير في القانون الكويتي،
واتفقت أنا وياه على إنه أنا أكتب له استشارة قانونية مكتوب متعلقة بالقانون الإماراتي، هو من سكن السعودية. وقال لي خلاص تمام إن شاء الله أول ما أنشئ الشركة أنت رح تكون المستشارة القانونية تاعت الشركة.
دائما أنا بحكيها هي مش حاضنة إنصاف، هي عائلة إنصاف. فعلا إحنا كنا عائلة وأسرة. يمكن المكسب الأول والأخير في إنصاف هو الفريق العام.
بداية الأجواء يمكن كان كل واحد مش عارف زميله، كانوا مدربين يتعاملوا معنا إحنا زملاء، كانوا مناعين فكرة إنه أنا مش خريج جديد، أنا محامي مزاول. أي واحد بده أي مساعدة أو استشارة كنا نتوجه للمدير للمنصف، كان بكل أريحية، كنا نحس حالنا إنه إحنا بوسط عائلة. لما بدينا المرحلة الثانية هي مرحلة إنه إحنا نستقبل القضايا، إنه إحنا صرنا قريبين من هذه الفئات الهشة، صرنا نعرف إيش مشاكلهم.
مرة إجت لي حالة تعاطفت معها بشكل كبير، صراحة ما أخذت منها ولا شكل ولا أخذت منها أتعب، المهم يعني أقدر أوصل لابنها.
واجهتني قضية من ضمن القضايا إنه في فتاة عمرها 18 سنة، كانت هذه الفتاة تزوجت وثم طلقت، فكانت هي معرضة لكثير انتهاك لحقوقها، وكانت حاسة حالها أنها مضطهدة. فإجت في فكرة إنه هي عايزة مصاغها الذهبي من جوزها، ومشيت معها خطوة خطوة في المحكمة وقدرت إن أرفع القضية، وقدرت بعد هيك إن أنا أتحصل على حكم لصالح هذه السيدة، برغم إنه هي كانت لا مش فاهمة لا هي إيش حقها في الزواج ولا إيش هي حقها كمرأة، ولا فاهمة إنه في إلها مصاغ ذهبي.
يمكن أنا واصلة للي أنا وصلت له دعوات أمي سهرها، بفرحة بابا فينا، يعني إنه بروح من الشغل يا أستاذة إيش صار معك اليوم، كيف شغلك اليوم.
شكرا لوالدي، أنت رجل عظيم حياة. لوالدتي، شكرا لأخواتي، هم يعني بهذيك الفترة هم اللي انتشلوني من حالة كانت نفسية صعبة جدا.
أنا بصنفهم الأقربون قلبا ودما، فشكرا لهم لأنهم يعني دائما خلف كل النجاحات إن ما كانوا أمامها. طبعا
دائما تدعمني في كل شيء، دائما دعواتها مركاني، دائما هي أكبر سند إلي في الحياة، يعني وجودها بتخيلش حياتي بدونها. هي شكرا على وجودك دائما معايا، شكرا لأنك أمي. يعني
بحكي لها إنه هي أغلى حدا عندي، ولولا وجودها ولولا دعمها على طول، بالرغم إنه هي يعني ما كانتش موافقة على التخصص، بس وقفت معي واحترمت رغبتي. بحكي لها إنه أنا كثير فخورة إنه هي أمي، وأنا فخورة لليوم اللي وصلت له أنت كنت السبب فيه.
لو وقفت قدام المراية بحكي لنفسي إنه بلشنا نصل، بلشنا نطلع السلم.
كده رواية إنه أنت كتير جدعة، حققتي شغلات في ناس كتير بسنة أو بمكاني ما حققوها،
وأنت صح.
وأنا متأكدة إنه كمان 5 سنوات حكون أفنان، يعني زي ما بطمح لنفسي. أنا اللي وصلته مش كافي، في كتير أشياء في بالي أنا راح أعملها إن شاء الله قدام من أهلي ومن الناس اللي بحبهم وخطيبي.
عارفة بس إني أنا إنسانة طموحة ومجتهدة، بس أحلي أكون بمكان أفضل.
بحكي لها طبعا شكرا إنه أنت أروى، وأنا كثير فخورة بنفسي. كل وقفاتي معي أنا مش ناسيلك إياها، وأنا بقدرك ومن ضروري حدا تاني يقدرك طالما أنت بتعرف شو أنت.
want to thank the interpreters because I think this is not what they thought was going to be an easy job to interpret the subtitles from English. So thank you. Next. On September 14th, it was my last day in Gaza. I was in the tallest building on the Strip. Next. The next day, or 23 days later, was bombed. Nothing that you see in that picture appears to be the reality. And so, if you listen to the voice of the women who were speaking, they were basically saying the same thing that the American lawyers were saying, and the Pakistani women were saying, and the Roma people. We all speak the same language, and especially when it comes from your heart. And they were committed to doing the right thing, as I know you all are. I see what goes on here. And the fact that I'm at this institution, I don't think is coincidental. I really believe that the wonderful things that you are all doing are part and parcel of the hope for the future. And so I laud you. I hope that our paths cross again. Pedro was able to help get some students to the U.S. If you can travel, it doesn't matter where it is, whether it's the U.S. or maybe not the U.S. now. I wouldn't spend money there if I were you. But you know, the world is out there. And so I know for the young people who went, they made a sacrifice to go, but it's really important to see the world and do all that you can and continue your skills. Next, I don't think there's anything else. Thank you for listening, and good luck to everybody, and blessings. Yep.
Muito obrigado, Fred. Antes de passar aqui para a professora Judy, um rápido aviso aos alunos da professora Luciane. A lista de presença se encontra no fundo da sala. Lembrem de assinar ao final. Agora, professora Judy, fique à vontade. Muito obrigado por estar aqui.
Thank you. Let's see, my presentation is coming. Yes, it's so nice to be here. I'd especially like to thank Pedro for the invitation. I'm going to shift the mood a little bit. Thank you so much, Fred, for that amazing and poignant presentation and for all the great work that you've done in the world. I'm going to shift the mood a little bit. I'm a social scientist, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and today happens to be the first day of classes where I teach. So I always like to start off, this is our new school year, freshmen. I like to start off by scaring them a little bit. So today, we are going to talk shit about white Argentines. Not really, but we will be talking a lot about race, right, in Argentina. Refusing to disappear, Afro-Argentine activism in Buenos Aires. So, and I know you Brazilians have thoughts about Argentines. I know. Yes, we'll get to that. Slide. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story. So, as was mentioned before, I do a study abroad in Buenos Aires. It was the first, and it's now the only, Black studies-focused study abroad in Argentina. And in 2018, I was there with my students. There's a photo of us there in San Telmo. So I'm going to tell you a little story that kind of helps you better understand my research. So in 2018, I was leading a study abroad trip in Buenos Aires, Argentina, for my very ethnically and racially diverse group of New York City Community College undergraduate students. We were in San Telmo, known as the Barrio del Tambor, or the neighborhood of the drums. And you can see it there in red. It is a historically Black neighborhood that once marked the outskirts of the city of Buenos Aires, and it was an area where Afro-Argentines were concentrated, and they played their music very proudly. The neighborhood is also famously known as the birthplace of tango, right? A dance and music style with heavy African influences that would come to later on define Argentine national identity. After we sat through a presentation about Afro-Argentine history, presentation that was given by my friend Bruno and his daughter Alicia, The presenters, my students, and I ate lunch at a nearby restaurant known for its asado, or like churrasco, right? I think that's what you guys call it. Similar. Slide. Asado is, yes, slide, next slide, yes. So that's Bruno. Asado is a national dish of Argentina, and it has its origins in the enslaved Afro-Argentine population, because they were very famously the mataderos, or the butchers, that would cut up the meat, but they were also, of course, the Afro-Argentines were the skilled chefs who would prepare it. Denied prime cuts of beef, the enslaved Afro-Argentines would take the castaway organs, also known as the achuras, right? The intestines, the heart, the kidneys, just everything, all of it, and expertly prepare them in ways that made them so tasty, they became the hallmark of this authentic traditional cuisine. So if you're eating a real asado, it's got all the innards there as well. And you know, us black people, we can make anything taste good, right? So Argentines love it. They love it all. So our guest speakers had beautifully narrated the history of Afro-Argentines and the deep roots of their families dating back to the transatlantic slave trade. And we carried on the conversation to the restaurant we went to. So our waiter, a white Argentine man in his 30s, enthusiastically asked us where we were all from. I explained that myself and the students had come from New York City, and Bruno explained that he and his daughter were Argentine from Morón, an area just outside the city of Buenos Aires. The waiter stopped, looked Bruno dead in the eye, and said, "No, you're not," and walked away. Slide. The students were left silent in shock. Then the outrage and anger set in, along with their disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Bruno and Alicia indicated that the situation was a regular occurrence for them. We had spent weeks learning about Afro-Argentines and their invisibility, and just like that, our beloved guests were made to disappear right before our eyes. So my research focuses on the activism of Africans and Afro-descendants in Buenos Aires, which is really the epicenter for the fights for rights and recognition. In Argentina, this struggle specifically involves a coalition of what we call Afro peoples. That means African immigrants, Afro-descendant immigrants from all over Latin America and the Caribbean, including Brazil, and Afro-Argentine activists like Bruno. So on the ground, they use the term Afro to discuss any activities related to these groups from the African diaspora. And I think it's the forging of this new Afro identity that has really been critical in the success of their organizing against anti-Black racism in Argentina. And this is especially important because of Argentina's pretty well-known history of whitening, and as well as their complex and layered history around this concept of Blackness, the term negro, and a lot of Afro-descendants without a phenotype that is necessarily associated with Blackness. So one of the first questions people always ask is, okay, but, or they'll say something like, I've been to Argentina, I didn't see any Black people. Okay, or I'm from Argentina and I can tell you there are no Black people. All right, so what happened? How did these people disappear in the first place? Well, first you have what I call discursive elimination. Afro-Argentines are written about officially in widely circulated text as if they have already disappeared, long before there is any evidence that their numbers have decreased, right? So this happens already from around the mid-1800s. They're already being written about as if they are completely gone, or they're all dying out. Then one of the most obvious things, which we'll talk about again in just a second, is that they are left out of the census. There is no category for Afro-descendants by the end of the late 1800s. I think around 1887 is the last census that has any category for Afro-descendants, and you won't see a category come back until 2010. Military service is another part of this disappearance, or another part of the mythology of the disappearance. A lot of Argentines will tell you that, oh, all the black people died in the war, which is an odd thing to say because it's only fit men of a certain age that go off to war, right? But they'll tell you, oh, they all died in the war. There is some truth to a lot of deaths in the war, because Argentina famously would send their black soldiers to the front lines, oftentimes without even shoes and without even proper weapons. They would have to use the bolas, the indigenous weapon, while the opponents would have the guns to shoot them. So there's some truth to that. Disease epidemics. There was a huge yellow fever epidemic in the late 1800s that did wipe out a large number of the population. But miscegenation, we already talked about. There's a lot of racial mixture in Argentina, and racism also accounts in a large part for their erasure. Slide. Next slide. Yes, so we do have to keep in mind some varying racial ideologies in the Americas. Now, most of Latin America, including here in Brazil, this is the math. European plus African plus indigenous equals some kind of mestizo, some kind of mixed person, right? Whatever name you want to give that racial category. Argentina, interestingly enough, also has this concept of mestizaje, but it's European plus African plus indigenous equals white. Some bad racial math there. But this is exactly what happens in Argentina. Like, yes, they acknowledge they are mixed people. It just so happens that after all of this mixture, everyone came out white. It's a miracle. Yes. So what is really happening? Scholar Leah Heller talks about this expansion of whiteness. Basically, you are, as another researcher said, you're considered white, with very few exceptions, like people who look like me. You're considered white until proven otherwise in Argentina. Everybody will tell you the same sort of origin story. Oh, my family's Spanish and Italian, right? Even regardless of what they look like, right? So this is part of the mythology. This is part of the whitening project that we see in Argentina at the end of or at the beginning of the 20th century, really, the end of the 19th century, and this is not unique to Argentina. What is unique is the success that Argentina has in this whitening project. Brazil had its own whitening project at the same time, but Argentina won, right? Brazil, still very mixed population, and if you talk about Brazil, people will understand that there's a lot of different phenotypes. When you talk about Argentina, people to this day will tell you, oh, they're all white, right? All right, slide. Yeah, so who's actually black in Argentina? That's a good question. Who is actually black? Argentina, there's this curious phenomenon that happens. The term negro has a very particular meaning in the Argentine context. Argentines have their negros, right? They look more like the guy on the left. That is a negro when you talk about negro in Argentina, okay? And they'll talk about discrimination against the negros, but it's not necessarily what you think. Negros are referring to people who typically have their origins in the northwest of Argentina. And they are descended from this large rural to urban migration that happens around the 1930s and 1940s and accompanies the rise of Peronism, right? The rise to power of Juan Domingo Perón and his very powerful wife, Eva or Evita Perón. This rural to urban migration sees massive and quick changes in major cities like Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires, which by that time had a couple of generations of European immigrants and was already looking quite white. And now all of a sudden, all of these very brown people who were very culturally different have come into these large urban centers and are very noticeable, right? That is the negro, and they are made fun of as negros by the residents of Buenos Aires, specifically called a derogatory term, cabecita negra, which is a racist insult in Argentina. So they kind of co-opt the term negro, and they're all as followers of Perón, and they say, well, we're negros peronistas. And to this day, they oftentimes refer to themselves as negros, but it's not a category that is racialized explicitly. It's a class-defined sort of category, talking about a social class isolation, marginalization. Now, there is a very clear racial element to this negro, right? So, and there are also people of African descent within these negros, but negro is not referring to the racial element. It's referring to that class-based element that is closely aligned with a certain political orientation as well. So those are their negros. Now, what about people who look like me, who are very clearly of African descent? Interestingly enough, negro is not a term that is popularly used for people who are of obvious African descent. It is still very much considered very rude to refer to people who are obviously black as negro, and Argentines very commonly use the term morocho, morocha, right? Sometimes morena, but more morocho to refer to these individuals. So you'll see that. So Argentina does acknowledge negros, but not the way that you think, not the racially defined ones, the ones that are very much class defined. All right, next. Yes, and then the next question is always, well, where are the black people? I didn't see them. Yes, this is a great question. I'm gonna stand up. Let me see if I can, because I noticed it's a little bit hard to see. So this is the capital city of Buenos Aires. And we're talking about historically how black people have always lived on the outer edges of the city. And there was a very deliberate project to push them outside of the city limits. And there are a couple of Argentine scholars who write about what that process looks like. There's a large population here in Avellaneda of black immigrants from Cape Verde that came in the early 1900s. There's also a population here in Ensenada as well. Now, if you're looking for Afro-Argentines descended from enslaved Africans in Argentina, there's a huge community in La Matanza. Very, very well-known community of Afro-Argentine families. But really, as far as you go west of the city, a little bit south, Morón, all of these areas tend to have a lot of Afro-Argentines. You find very few of them still located in the capital city, even in the outer neighborhoods. They've all been pushed outside of the city limits. Okay, slide. All right. So a little bit more, I just want to say one more note about the whitening aspect of Argentina and their alleged disappearance. The census, as George Reed Andrews mentions, historian who wrote one of the first books about this topic, the census was the most effective tool in the erasure of Afro-Argentines. But the construction of Argentina as a white nation was a really complex process that begins in the middle of the 19th century and ends around the dawn of the 20th century. And it's several events that lead to this, right? And there's several scholars who have done a lot of great research writing about this. But we talk about the discursive elimination, the ceasing of collecting data, but also of great significance was the fall of the dictator Juan Manuel de Rosas in 1852, after over 2 decades of being in power. And because he represented the interior of the country, which there's always been this divide between Buenos Aires and the interior. Buenos Aires being white, the white Argentina, and the interior being brown and very not mixed and non-white. There's always been this sort of division. So that was a momentous historical moment that really defined Argentina as a nation. Because the interior lost, right, and Buenos Aires won, Buenos Aires represented, quote, civilization, and the interior, where all the gauchos were, where you had the slave trading posts, right, with a lot of Afro-Argentine communities, where you had a lot of indigenous peoples, that was barbarism. So it was a symbolic, very literal and symbolic defeat that turns Argentina into this white nation, right? That's how they are going to be defined from that time on. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Sarmiento, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento is often cited as an important architect of the nation-building project, and his work, Civilization and Barbarism, published in 1845, that really outlines some of these ideas. Interestingly enough, he was also the father of the Argentine education system. And as you can probably guess, there's a direct tie between the way people are educated and how they view themselves racially. So Sarmiento, who very much and deliberately was trying to eliminate these non-white populations, had this incredibly popular publication that was circulated around the globe. He also, interestingly enough, right after this publication, he served as Argentina's ambassador to the US. He was in the United States. This was around the Reconstruction, right, after the Civil War. So he was already really good at racism, but I feel like he might have just gotten a little bit better after visiting the US, right? And he continued his writings on race. Okay, and I want to skip ahead. This is the 2010 census. This is the, this is a very important historic census. This was the bicentennial of the nation. This was during the Fernández de Kirchner administration. And this Afro-descendant question that appears in the census, again, for the first time since like 1887, is a really important historic event. It was preceded by a pilot census in 2005 where they kind of figured out how to do the question, which neighborhoods. They surveyed very heavily black neighborhoods, and they came up with the question there that basically uses the term Afro-descendant. Turns out that's not the best term to use. It's a very top-down term that comes from the NGO world. If you're talking to people who work in federal governments, these kinds of circles. People on the ground don't necessarily identify with that term, right? But the 2010 census is not distributed in all, or the Afro question is not distributed in all the census forms. Why? Because they had already printed the census forms by the time they got approval to put the Afro question in. So it only shows up in 10% of the forms, and it's very randomly distributed. It's not sent to the areas where they had already tested, knew had high populations of Afro-descendants. So the result is something like 150,000 people identify as Afro-descendant, which is still important because before that you had 0. So basically overnight, in 10 years, you found 150,000 people who said they were Afro-descendant, which is quite impressive. The 2022 census is the last census. The Afro-descendant question, which was revised to also include the term negro, asking not only do you identify as Afro-descendant, but do you identify as being, or do you have ancestors who are negro? It just leaves the word there. Doesn't say anything about class or anything. Or from Africa, then, you know, that's the question, basically, which is pretty interesting. The number doubles in 2022. You have 300,000 people now that, this is without any funding for a real campaign like they were trying to do, just some stuff on the internet, some videos, but that's pretty impressive that that number managed to double. And the overwhelming majority of these people are Afro-Argentines, descended from enslaved Africans. These are not people who are recent immigrants. All right, next. Okay, so I want to make a connection to this identity and some more recent legal issues that Africans and Afro-descendants have been facing in Argentina. Interestingly enough, in Argentina, this is all in the 21st century, there have been 4 lawsuits that cite anti-Black racism, right? As a cause of discrimination. And these are, most of them are in the early 2000s. I guess they all begin around the early 2000s. But we have 4 lawsuits that cite anti-Black racism and have been decided. I'm just going to talk about one so that we have enough time to do our discussion. And the one I want to talk about I think is quite fascinating because it borrows a lot from Brazil and some Brazilian concepts and lawsuits. And it involves the Movimento Afrocultural. So I first learned about this group, the Movimento Afrocultural, which is an Afro-descendant organization started by a group of Afro-Uruguayan immigrants who live in Argentina. And they had a space that was a casa tomada, basically. Well, it was a warehouse, not a casa, but it was a warehouse that had been abandoned that they occupied, right? In Argentina, they call it a casa tomada, a taken house. And in Argentina, the laws are loose on some things, okay? They're very loose in terms of housing. As long as no one complains, you can pretty much live there indefinitely. And I think after 10 years, you can even claim legal rights, and it's your house. So these individuals had been there since the late 90s, but then someone came and claimed the space and said it was theirs, and they had bought it, and these people were being kicked out. Now, the space was not just a residence for this large group of Afro-descendants and their kin, so friends, family, etc. It was also being used as a sort of cultural center. They would teach capoeira there. They actually make drums as well from scratch. They had made, which is pretty amazing. And they make some other instruments. They'll have different kinds of educational classes there as well. And they'll host all kinds of Afro-focused events and activities. So it was also an important cultural space for them. The group itself that inhabited this space traces their origins back to the late 1980s, but they didn't physically have the space until the late 90s. The space was described by two white Argentine anthropologists as being a sort of quilombo. This was actually an important concept because it was used in the lawsuit as well. This idea of a quilombo or a maroon colony. And quilombo, be careful, if you know Argentines, they're annoying, right? They use that word in a very derogatory way. If they want to say something is a mess, it's a quilombo. This is important because they're going into a legal system that knows nothing about black people, has almost zero precedence on lawsuits related to racism, forget anti-black racism. So that word typically just means something incredibly derogatory. But in this case, these anthropologists were saying, look, this functions as a quilombo. This is a place where all of these different cultural activities are taking place, are being preserved. This is a place for learning, etc. And the argument was that you are depriving this marginalized group of a space to practice and maintain their culture. Interestingly enough, this ended up being a pretty successful argument. Now, there were two lawsuits. There was an eviction lawsuit. They lost the eviction lawsuit, but the second lawsuit was related to their right to have a space, basically a cultural center, a space to practice their culture, just like every other group, every other marginalized group. The lawsuits has a lot of twists and turns. It goes to the court system from 2009 to 2014. Here's where it gets really interesting. They actually win that case. They win the right to a space, and the city of Buenos Aires is told they have to provide them with a space. So they find a cultural center in the neighborhood of San Telmo, which by this time is extremely expensive property, right? Very coveted place because of all the tourism that's happening. And this is the space that you see represented here, is the new cultural center space. There was no sort of legal precedent for this kind of case, so the lawyers had been using the quilombola lawsuits from Brazil as a legal precedent to make their arguments here. But in 2017, this space was shut down by the city due to what they called irregularities. They claimed the site wasn't being run properly. It was missing some important things like a clearly marked exit sign. they were just kind of searching, really. The city wanted to close down this site. Next, I think I have a picture of the protest. The next slide. Yes, in the middle you see the picture of the protest about the closing down of this space. So they went back into court, and it took years for them to actually get a response. But the space was officially closed in 2019 for, quote, renovations amid this legal battle, and it didn't open up again until 2023 after another favorable judgment. So there were several attempts made to take away this space, right, to remove these individuals from this space. But in the end, they had a favorable judgment. In October 2023, the space was reopened as a cultural center under the Programa Afrocultural. And they don't exclusively do workshops and events around Africans and Afro-descendants, but that is still very much a part of the work that they do. For now, it's functioning, and interestingly enough, one of the board of directors that was assigned to look over the space is actually an Afro-Uruguayan man, a black Afro-Uruguayan. So we're very happy about that. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, no, I'll do shorter. Yes, I'm going to speed up a little bit. I want to mention, because I talked about one of the 4 lawsuits that was decided, I want to mention that it's very hard to go to court in Argentina and talk about racism, period, but especially anti-black racism. Number one, these black populations, Africans, Afro-descendants, they are not considered significant in any way. There is a belief that Argentina does not have racism. Well, they'll tell you, well, okay, maybe we have racism against like Bolivians, Paraguayans, right? Those people, but it's impossible to have racism against black people in Argentina. Why? Because there are no black people in Argentina. See how that works? Yes, that is the argument that is given. And this is believed at all levels, even in the court system. Even more challenging is when you go to court, there's only 2 laws related to racism. Guess how many of those laws judges know? 0. There's only 2 that cover racism. So you go into the court and you have to tell the judge what the anti-discrimination laws are, right? This is another huge challenge as well. And basically, the second one is just a revision of the first law. The first law is a general anti-discrimination law that was passed in 1988. And the second law is from 2015, and it basically just made it easier to incriminate people on for discriminatory acts. And the burden of proof would lie on the accused to prove that the crime had not been committed, right? Which is quite a shift in the law and the way that things are usually done. I'll mention one more, because we see INADI there. That's the National Institute Against Discrimination. Let me see, xenophobia. I have to translate this title, oh my goodness. El Instituto contra la Discriminación, la Xenofobia, el Racismo. So that's INADI, which was established in 1995. It played, and it was actually just closed down last year, I believe, August of 2024, by the current government. It was established by an act of Congress. This was the only place that kept statistics on racism. The only institution in the entire country that had any statistics on racism. So the fact that the current government of Milei closed it down is quite significant. And again, this was created through an act of Congress. So how did Milei get around that? He said, well, they're going to be absorbed by the Ministry of Justice. The same time, when this was announced that they were closing INADI, Milei puts on his Instagram a post celebrating the closing of INADI. nothing's going to be absorbed by the Minister of Justice. No one's going to be able to go to court and have any, say. There's also going to be no record of any racist acts. There's nowhere to report these things. There are also 5 other laws in Argentina just kind of recognizing the continued presence of Afro-Argentines, but they, laws of recognition without any action attached to that legislation. So they don't do much in that sense. I just want to wrap up by just thinking of some possible plans of actions, like what needs to be done. There's obviously a lot of continued challenges in Argentina. You have one of the biggest challenges you can see with the results of the census is that most Afro-Argentines do not recognize themselves as being Afro-descendants or attribute any importance or significance to that. It's like in a lot of other countries like the US, it's the immigrants, the black immigrants coming in that are leading the movement, that are having a very different vision and understanding of race as well. Afro-descendants don't have knowledge of how to access the limited legal resources either. They don't understand the court system. This involves multiple factors as well. And also, nobody talks about race in Argentina, period. So it's pretty impressive. Again, all the 4 court cases involve foreigners, but it's hard to find Afro-Argentines that recognize the discrimination that they're facing to be based on racism, whether it's structural racism or other forms of racism. One of the solutions, we can go to the next slide. Yes, there's several educational projects that we'll talk about later. Next, we're gonna have to speed through these. This is around Maria de Remedios del Valle. Academic research support, like I mentioned, the study with Fernandez Bravo, who's there on the left. Next, kind of supporting these lawsuits, which has been really important to have the academic evidence to support these lawsuits when they go to court. And one of the more permanent forms of visibility is recently, I think it was last year, that Maria de Remedios del Valle, the Madre de la Patria, the mother of the Argentine nation, who for most of history has been represented as a white woman, Florencia Guzman, the scholar there, published an article, finally, with all the evidence showing that this woman was indeed an Afro-descendant woman, something that the Afro-Argentine community had known for a long time, but there wasn't scholarly evidence, historical evidence to support these claims. This research was extremely important. She is now on the 10,000. Now, is the money worth anything? No. But she is now on the 10,000 peso bill with Belgrano, right? So it's a nice souvenir if you're there, right? But this is huge. Argentina has a black mother of their nation, which who would have thought, right? A few years ago. That's major. And also, it's on money. People are going to need money. They're going to have to see this black woman all the time and be reminded, like, oh, right, we do have black people, right? So this is a major change. So a major step towards permanent visibility. And I'll do my last slide there, talking about OAFRO. So in 2020, during the pandemic, I was approached by Madola Ntaka, who is on the far left there in the second photo. He is an Afro-Argentine lawyer of South African descent. He approached me with this idea of starting an organization of black legal scholars and lawyers through the University of Buenos Aires, which is the main law school in the nation, the most prestigious one. And he knew a couple, I think literally 2 people there, and I found 3 others that I knew were studying law. So we created this group, OAFRO, you have the full name there. And I ran a program for them in 2022 in New York City to kind of help train them. And we mentioned it in my introduction. But this is one sort of small step towards trying to change the system, create some legal precedents in the system dealing specifically with anti-black racism. And from the minute OAFRO was conceptualized, I don't know how, people found us, but they started messaging individuals saying, hey, can you help me with this legal issue? Can you help me? So it was kind of fascinating because we didn't have any social media. They had just heard about it, and that was enough. So it showed that there was really a need for support for all of these different individuals that had recognized that the fact that they were Afro-descendant, they were Black, was playing a role in their discrimination, and they wanted to have a legal recourse to deal with that. I'm going to end there so that we can have a little bit of a discussion. Thank you all.
Muito obrigado, Judy. O Pedro está inscrito aqui para fazer comentário.
Do you have then it's easier for us. Ok. Bom, gostaria primeiro... Ok? Eu gostaria primeiro de agradecer as apresentações, né? Para nós também é um desafio desenvolver esse projeto, né, com a advocacia e estimular essas vocações, especialmente para prestar esses serviços, né, de qualidade, especializados, e com apoio da universidade, né, para as populações vulneráveis. Gostaria de dizer também o seguinte, que esse é um aviso, né? Nós precisamos encerrar hoje às 20 horas em ponto, né, por causa da tradução simultânea. Portanto, eu vou pedir para vocês para a gente, né, a gente pular a parte das questões, né? Gostaria de fazer só uma especificamente, assim, né, para os dois, para ver se a gente consegue, né, encerrar com as observações finais, né, que é, né, como é que você